Welcome back to another episode of the F1 Talking Points podcast. Today, it is just me and Tommo. Unfortunately, the two merchants, they can make it. You know,
this is better, mate. This is better. Bun them off.
Exactly. No more highlight merchants, no more Ricciardo defending. Although there might be some Ricciardo slander, you never know. Just for Matt, I mean, we've got to do it. But yeah, so just me and Tommo for this one today. We're going to talk about quite a few different topics, a bit of news as well that recently has been announced. But the bulk of this topic, or the bulk of this video, is going to be talking about Red Bull and Sergio Perez. Now, to be brutally honest, actually, thinking back even all the way to 2019, I feel like that second seat is just always in the news every single year. And as good as Sergio Perez started at the beginning of the season, it is beginning to tail off a little bit for him. And what's really interesting is that compared to, previous seasons, Red Bull are winning the championship. They're on their way to winning both the drivers with Max, potentially even in Singapore, which we'll get to. And I'm sure they're going to, win the constructors as well. But with Sergio Perez's recent kind of performance slump, to be honest, especially since kind of the mid portion of the season, yet again, his seat is being called into question. So the way I kind of want to do this is actually beginning or talking about the beginning of the year, because what did you feel in the first 5 or 6 races, Tommo, in terms of Sergio Perez, the way he started? Because especially with these brand new cars and their kind of handling characteristics before Red Bull really kind of were able to put more upgrades and kind of suit the car more towards what they need, it did look like Sergio Perez made a massive step at the beginning of 2022.
Yeah, I wasn't hugely surprised at the start of the year. Again, given that fresh slate, it would give a lot of drivers opportunities to kind of reaffirm their position. Obviously, Sergio hadn't been at the team for particularly long, and Max was well embedded into Red Bull. There was a lot of mutual understanding between him and the team. And so for Sergio to have like a strong start to the year, because he is clearly, I mean, again, 2020, arguably driver of the year that season. He's clearly a very, very capable Formula One driver. There's no shed of doubt or question around that. So I wasn't massively surprised. Obviously, Saudi Arabia was a big highlight. Monaco as well, even though there was probably a bit of luck involved in that Monaco result. I think the Saudi result was a really strong one. But again, I just think that as time has gone on and you look at the relative gaps between, not even just Charles and Carlos and George and Lewis, the other, 2 teams that are up the top, but various driver pairings throughout the grid. It's a shame, but also I felt like it was going to be an inevitability that the gap would open back up to what we saw kind of last year, where at the end of the day, sure, Sergio did his bit. He did his bit. No doubt last year to help Max for the championship. He got a win. He was there to pick up the pieces. But you look at that relative delta and you have to ask questions. But again, this is the third driver it's happened to. So I think the questions, it's clearly something deeper than just putting it on the driver. I think there's a lot of things going on in the background which we don't know, and just not from a conspiracy point of view, but just from we don't know how the teams are setting up the cars, how they're approaching the design, how much Max has a influence on the movement of that car. Because look, it's the job of an F1 team to make a fast car, and it's job of the driver to adapt. And it just feels like the performance window of that Red Bull, compared to the performance window of a Ferrari, perhaps, you need a really special driver to make the most of it. Or maybe just Max is that good. And maybe it is just that Aldas. I don't know, mate.
I feel like there's still this unknown about Max Verstappen, because it's difficult to compare the Max now to the Max that went up against Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, I feel like they're 2 different drivers. I feel like Max really, especially in 2019 with Ricciardo leaving, made such a big step up, not just in terms of maybe raw speed, because I think it was always there, but just as an overall package and as a leader. By 2019, even though Gasly was kind of even though Gasly was older, that was Max's team. Max was the number one, and it was Gasly who needed to almost catch up a little bit. So ever since then, he's been the leader of Red Bull. And I think looking at Sergio this season, I mean, the highlights at the beginning of the year, it was really good to see, actually, because it brought even more excitement into 2022. I never kind of got onto the train of, oh my God, could Sergio Perez be like a title contender? I feel we always knew that Max, especially at the beginning of the year, you could see that Max was struggling. He wasn't shying away from it. I remember after qualifying in Australia, I think he said that he really just didn't like the car. Like he just wasn't vibing with it. But there were those highlights. I mean, that pole position in Saudi Arabia, he got really unlucky, I think, with the safety car there. He was leading that first portion of the stint, and then obviously, dropped back behind Leclerc and Max. And And then obviously Monaco as well. And as much, as you can say about luck, Max wasn't quite in the zone and in the rhythm around Monaco, and it was Sergio who, yes, rode his luck a little bit, and I'm sure Ferrari helped that out a little bit as well. But it did look like the beginning of the season. It was a lot more closer. I mean, Red Bull especially were able to put that pressure on Ferrari very early on, despite the fact that I think Ferrari definitely had the better overall kind of package, or certainly in terms of car speed, even on a Sunday at the beginning of the season. But it was that combination of Max and Sergio kind of performing, maybe not at Max's best, but Sergio, certainly Sergio performing, I think, better than ever, really, especially when you think about the pressure of a top team. And it really started to fall apart, I think, around Canada time. Now, there's always... there's a great graphic, actually, that the race produced in terms of their qualifying differences. And especially in the wet, Sergio is just nowhere near Max. We're talking seconds. So even as early as Canada, obviously crashed off in quali, there was, that's kind of where it all started. And especially since the summer break, whether you want to talk about the technical, the technical directive of the floor, or it's just the upgrades of the Red Bull, he has dropped off again back to the Gasly Albon kind of level. I mean, I think 6.5 tenths is the average in terms of their qualifying. And the problem is that that's coincided with Mercedes especially really upping their game. I mean, I think the combination of Lewis and George is arguably, I think they're the best teammate combination on the grid, to be honest, right up there with the Ferrari drivers as well. And what that means is that even though Sergio does have a quick car, there is no hiding. There's no doubt about it. So it's been very interesting how since the summer break, Max has been dominating, but Sergio's been further than ever.
Yeah, because, I mean, so many great drivers over even just recent years. You look at Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren, you look at Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari in 2020, you look at, there's numerous examples, and we're seeing it from Checo now where, drivers who have proven how good they are, right, in the right machinery, in the right environment, it can take a car that you're not comfortable, if you're not fully comfortable in the package you've got, and your teammate's killing it, which was the case for, again, Seb in 2020, because Charles was doing a great job. It was the case for Daniel at the minute, relative to Lando. Those pressures, I think, can really amplify that lack of confidence in the car. And then all of a sudden, and again, I think, like you say, that delta being so big in the wet is the true test of, like, how at one do you feel with this piece of machinery? Because drivers talk all the time about just getting into this kind of zone. A zone where you're not having to think about what you're doing and you can just do it on autopilot, and you've got that instinctive feel. And you feel like Max has clearly got that more than Sergio has at the moment. Lando's clearly got that more than Daniel has at the moment. And Charles clearly had that more than Seb did in 2020. So I just think that it's frustrating, because I think also this is just the deal with the sport. This is the deal with Formula One, is that, the team is going to push the car in a direction that's going to make it quicker. And if one driver can adapt but the other one can't, I think it's tough shit. You know what I mean? I think it's something you've got to deal with, because the team's always going to want to add performance. It's always going to want to push in a direction. And if your lead driver is able to extract that, you can't expect the team to facilitate. And I think there's also a conversation as well around, are Red Bull happy with this? I mean, it's probably not ideal, but also, I mean, when it comes to all great dominations in the sport, whether it was Lewis with Valtteri helping him out, whether it was Schumacher with Barrichello helping him out, is this really a problem for Red Bull? It might be a problem for Sergio, on a personal level, because he wants to fight. Of course he does. But also, I think he knows the cards that he's been dealt. I think he'd be naive to not realise that, and of course he's going to push and want to make Red Bull rethink their maybe long-term strategy. But Max Verstappen's still only 24, and he's had 8 years of experience in Formula One at the end of this year, which is insane. He's the current, he's the past, he's the present, and he's the future of that team. That's the thing.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It's 24 years old, Max Verstappen. It honestly feels like he's been in the sport forever, but
it's mad,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's mad, yeah. I think in terms of like the car difference and what's been happening from everything that we know at the beginning of the season, these 18-inch Pirellis, the actual characteristics of the tyres just meant that there was more understeer in the car. So that kind of, in the RB, 16 kind of era, both in 2020 and 2021, that characteristic was a pointy front end, kind of loose at the rear, but that turn-in is exactly what Max wanted. Very kind of stable at the front, but not as stable at the rear. But he could handle that, and he used that to his advantage. That's what he thrived on. And ultimately, that's what got the most performance out of that generation of Red Bulls. Now, going into the season with these brand new tyres and these brand new cars, heavier as well, it was much more understeery at the front, which is exactly what, actually, it's what more traditional drivers kind of, are more used to. So that's why it brought it kind of further more towards Sergio, and Max just wasn't feeling that front end. He wasn't turning it. It just didn't give him the rotation that he wanted. But as the team have put performance on the car, I think it's important to kind of differentiate that. The team aren't specifically going to Max and asking what he wants and disregarding what Sergio Perez wants, but as they're putting performance on the car, where they're finding it in the wind tunnel or through their research, naturally Max Verstappen is able to get more performance out of that car than Sergio Perez is. So it's not as if they're not listening to Sergio, it's that Max is getting even more performance, and look at the results that he's been able to accumulate over the past 5 races.
It's almost like Red Bull are adding performance, then they're giving the car to the drivers, and they're adding theoretical performance because that's all they can do until the actual drivers got into the car. And then almost because Max just has this freakish ability to be able to drive a car that's teetering on the edge, because he's able to extract that performance, that's kind of working against Checo. If they didn't have Max, then obviously they would try out these and then they wouldn't see the same gains. So potentially they would go in a different direction. But it's almost because that Max is able to extract that on the edge performance, compared to say there were 2 Sergio Perez's where, the drivers wouldn't be able to extract that performance, and then potentially they'd go in a different direction. And again, when you look at how close the relative delta is between Russell and Hamilton, between Sainz and Leclerc, I think that's closed up. If anything, I think those teammates Perez have got closer. If anything, and it just feels that, again, whether this is a product of just Max just being that good, that's the thing as well. Like, maybe it is just that. Maybe he is just that good. He's got that style that they're just able to chuck a temperamental, edgy car, and he's just able to make it work. Like, maybe that is the biggest factor here.
And also, I really want to get your thoughts on this, but just kind of a little theory that I have is that at the beginning of the season, because that car was a little bit further away from Max, I mean, he wasn't 100% comfortable with it. It was much closer to Checo. We did see that Ferrari and Red Bull, it was track to track, which team had the stronger package. But ever since the team have found performance, or again, put that theoretical performance onto the car, and Max has been able to extract a lot more out of it because it suits him a lot more, that car has been a lot more dominant. And I think that's what's quite interesting to me in terms of when the car was closer to Checo, we had a much more closer battle between Red Bull and Ferrari, but now that it is closer to Max, I mean, that car is dominant. Ferrari can have they've had a few pole positions, obviously they still have performance, but that car now is dominant in the races. And I mean, you can, Max can start on pole position, he can start in P14, he can start from the pit lane, and he just seems to be able to win because that car, in his hands specifically, is unbelievably dominant. So how do you think that trade-off, is this sustainable for the future? Because this is the trade-off that I think we're seeing now. Like, that car in Max's hands is dominant, much more so than it was at the beginning of the season, and I think it's totally related to the fact that Checo is now further away. But is this sustainable as Ferrari and Mercedes potentially improve in 2023?
I think in an ideal world, of course, you give, both drivers are able to extract top performance out of the car. Question is, right, and again, you look at, I think Mercedes was so clear in 2016 that I think the Hamilton-Rosberg battling didn't massively, apart from Catalonia, obviously, didn't massively kind of impact their ability to fight. But Toto Wolff's talked about this. He'd rather have, he doesn't want drivers that are bickering and fighting. And, he kind of inherited that Hamilton-Rosberg driver lineup. So, look, there's clear pros and cons to having, because the cons to having 2 drivers who are at a very similar level at the same team fighting at the front, there are clear cons to that, because all of a sudden then it's like, okay, when you're bringing upgrades to the car, you have to be like, you can't really preference. Whereas Red Bull, obviously, when they've got a new upgrade, they're obviously going to give it to Max first. That's a no-brainer decision, and no one's really going to begrudge them for that. I mean, they shouldn't, because at the end of the day, if they want to maximise their chances of winning. But then, counteractively, of course, Checo isn't up there as much as he could be or should be. Say this championship, Charles is only 20 points behind, which maybe he should be with all the strategy issues we've seen this season. I think if Charles was right up there fighting with Max, I think Checo being off as far as he is at the moment would be a bigger issue for Red Bull. Right now, it's not a massive problem because he's opened up this massive delta and Ferrari's incompetence has for sure helped them out. But I do also think, going forwards, I know teams say that the constructors is the most important thing to them. I would disagree. I don't think it is. I think the marketing pool of a drivers' champion, that's what people remember. No one gives a toss that Mercedes won the Constructors' Championship last year. No one gives a toss that Ferrari won the Constructors' Championship in 2008 when Lewis won his first title. That doesn't get remembered. Yes, you get a little bit more prize money, but in terms of, legacy from that point of view, it's drivers' championships that people remember. But I don't know. If you were a team principal, Adas, what would you rather have a Hamilton Russell or a Charles Carlos where there is maybe one driver that's slightly ahead but is pretty close, or would you rather have a bigger delta where you've got a Max Verstappen who is maybe that extra little cut above, but then the second driver you can't guarantee on them fighting and taking points off of others, I suppose.
Definitely. I mean, if I was... What has history taught us, really? That you need a number one and a number two driver. Like, even at Mercedes now, I mean, I love the combination of Hamilton and Russell. It's exciting, they're going at it on track as well. We've seen it already. But even in Zandvoort, there's just a little bit of tension opening when I think George Russell was asked, if the team asked you to stay out on, worn tyres just to protect Lewis, would you have done it? And you can see just Russell going, I'm not sure I would be doing that. So you can see, I'm not saying there's massive beef or something, but you can see something already stirring in Russell where I don't want to help Hamilton. I've got my own career as much as Lewis is, the 7-time champion. So that eventual rift is going to open, and it's going to open more as the car gets more competitive. That is totally natural. I actually don't know any. I mean, you can tell me, give me a shout. Tell me a combination of two absolute alpha drivers where it's actually worked, for year after year after year. Like, they usually fall apart at some point, or there's some kind of tension in the team that naturally, wants them to kind of split. So it's something that's totally natural in Formula One, and I think that sustainably, you need a number one and a number two. Now, when you threw out the words having a big delta between the two of them, that doesn't make me as excited about a number one and a number two, because that gives opportunities to, teams with potentially better driver lineups. But I think it's all about how much performance does Max Verstappen have in hand over the rest of the grid. So, I mean, if they were as they are now, no problem. Max has just won, the last 5 races in a row, so he's absolutely chilling. And to be fair, I'm looking at the championship right now. What's crazy is that Charles Leclerc has won 3 races, Sergio Perez has only won 1, and yet Sergio Perez is 3rd in the championship, only 9 points behind Charles Leclerc. So that good start to the season that he had, he's still fighting for 2nd in the championship, which just seems bizarre. Like, Charles Leclerc should be miles ahead. And when you actually look at the top 3 teams and the 6 drivers in those teams, there is no doubt that if you ranked all of them, Sergio Perez is a firm 6th. He is undoubtedly the worst driver out of that incredible pack that we have at the top, and maybe that speaks to the quality at the top of the grid, but it's all about what's sustainable. How dominant of a car can Red Bull provide Max, and can he almost overcome that deficit of not having a teammate that might not be able to help him against Ferraris and Mercedes in the future? But if he has enough of a performance advantage over Ferrari and Mercedes, then maybe he doesn't need Sergio Perez. So it's kind of down to Red Bull in a way, but I also think what's important is the relationship between Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen as well. And at the moment, it looks pretty good. I mean, I don't know about, what you think, but it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right now it's perfect, because again, I think different teams. So say you're a midfield team or even a low, any team that isn't realistically fighting for wins, I think having 2 alphas isn't a bad thing. I think you need those presences, you need that experience to push the car development forward. As soon as you start fighting for championships, that's where it becomes an issue. But like you say, I think, Checo was out of the sport at one stage. We thought he'd be coming off the back of arguably his strongest season in Formula One. He was potentially going to be losing his seat altogether, which obviously would have been like, and I've said this a million times before, it was the right decision to replace Albon with Checo. Like, clearly, right? With a driver of Checo's stature after his 2020 season, it was a no-brainer to get in a driver with that experience who would be able to be a more kind of solid pair of hands, which he has been. To what extent now this season, it's hard to say, because I think Albon's now proving that, you know, he is a very competent driver, and I think there is more to Checo's gap to Max than just driver talent, right? But look, at the end of the day, I just think that, you know, they've got a really good position now. Again, I think Max and Checo get along great. There's a great working relationship there. I think there's a good understanding. There's been a couple of times, especially earlier in the season, where Checo wasn't too happy with, you know, decisions the team were making, which seemed to prioritise Max. But they kind of, you know, they kept a lid on it, Red Bull. And I think obviously now that gap's opened, you know, Checo would just have, like, at the start of the season, fair enough, him pushing back, just like George pushed back to Mercedes, telling him to, you know, if they were to tell him to compromise his race to help Lewis. I think at the start of the season, fair enough, because Checo was in the straight fight. Yes, Checo's fighting for second, but I mean, that is because of Ferrari's incompetence more than it is of Checo's performance. Yeah, if you just take the first half of the season, you'd put Checo above Sainz, you'd put Checo maybe even above Hamilton, because, you know, Hamilton with the experimental setups on his car wasn't delivering the levels that he has been in the second half of the year. Yeah, look, I just think right now it's solid, and all the Red Bull talk around, you know, AlphaTauri being a sister team now, potentially bringing Nick De Vries. You just wonder that, you know, Checo's what, 33, I think? 32, 33, I think.
Yeah,
around
32,
that age.
33.
And so they can get a bunch more years out of him where
he's 32.
He's 32, okay, yeah. So they've got time to, you know, look for that next driver, I suppose. But are they in any rush? Because, you know, they've got the marquee driver. They've got Verstappen, who they're going to get at least another 10 years out of, minimum. He'll still only be 34 in 10 years' time. Like, they could get him, could get more out of him than that. So, is there pressure like there was on Mercedes? Because, you know, Russell's coming in. Yes, they've got kind of two alphas almost in Russell and Hamilton, but that's because Russell is being lined up as Hamilton's replacement for when he eventually retires. It's kind of slightly different there. And obviously there's this transition where there's going to be, like you said at Zandvoort, where it might get a bit prickly at times. But yeah, I just think that, you know, Red Bull right now don't have a problem, but I think long term they need to be, I guess, careful as well. Because, you know, Christian Horner's talked about being disappointed that Oscar Piastri kind of slipped through his fingers because there was an opportunity to sign him a while back. I worry about that for McLaren, you know. Lando's, you know, firmly on top at the minute in that team. Piastri comes in. If you put some worldies in, maybe that upsets the apple cart a bit. But again, I think when you're a midfield team, there's, you know, if McLaren were fighting for championships and you had a really competitive Piastri pushing Norris, it could come to blows. But I think while that's a midfield team, it's okay. But I think Red Bull need to, you know, play their cards right long term, because, you know, they do have this really clear 1 and 2, which no other teams apart from Williams seem to have, really. You know what I mean?
That was a little bit of a prop to your boy Albon, wasn't it? Just a little mini bit of prop. Actually, to be fair, talking of Albon, just to really kind of piggyback on something that you said, I think what's quite interesting is that, again, at the end of 2020, or even midway through 2020, Sergio Perez was out of Formula One, having the season of his life in the pink Mercedes. And stunningly, it was a top team that kind of threw him, you know, a life raft. It was unbelievable. I mean, how often does that happen, you know? That you actually, like, end up out of the sport, but then a top team with a championship level car next season end up, you know, helping you out. So he was in such a strange position. But I think the Albon thing, on pure performance, I don't think Sergio Perez now is doing any better than what Albon was doing in 2020. I think all it was is mental. Albon, I think we forget, he was in his second year. And I could tell in 2020 there was some interviews where it was hitting him more than the way it's hitting Sergio now. Sergio has a decade of experience in Formula One. Alex in 2020 was struggling with just the pressure of, you know, people saying that he's struggling, that gap between him and Max kind of being brought up in almost every single interview, almost every single race. And I think he needed to be taken out of that environment. So I totally don't blame Red Bull for doing what they did. And I feel like what Sergio is doing now is that I don't see him I don't see him showing, you know, the same cracks that Albon did in 2020 in some of his interviews. I think he's a lot more kind of circumspect. He's a lot more, he knows exactly the situation that he's in. And something, again, that I think is that even if I was Sergio Perez right now, you've got to have that kind of, you've got to be pragmatic and think, I could be an Alpine right now. If Red Bull wanted to drop me today, I'm sure Alpine would pick him up right away. I mean, maybe the whole Ocon Perez relationship might make it a bit difficult, but in terms of the quality of driver that he is, he would command a top seat. Like, he would, in my opinion, he would be above Gasly, above Ricciardo as one of the absolute better drivers in that midfield. But is that what you really, is that a better quality of life when it comes to racing? Slumming it in the midfield, maybe getting a podium if the stars align? Or is it better to be a top driver, have a big contract, which he did get, after Monaco, and be always in that fight for the podium? So you've got to have that pragmatism. What's a better quality of life, and what are you happy to deal with? Because if you're happy to be a top team and play that number 2, being at Red Bull as a number 2 driver is not a bad way to go. No. All things, considered.
It's still like an incredibly... I mean, it's a privilege just to be on the F1 grid, let alone in a car that can fight for wins. I think, look, it's a very human choice, right? Nico Rosberg retired after he won his first championship at the age of 31. Fernando Alonso, Kimi Räikkönen have gone long into their 40s. Different people want different things, right? And not just in F1. You could, some people, when they set up a business, would be satisfied with just something that does them over, pays for their mortgage, supports their family, and gives them time freedom. Other people want to build, a multinational corporation that turns over billions and they can become a, CEO and live the higher life. Like everyone wants different things in life, and all these drivers are human beings. And, Checo's in a situation now where he is in a race winning car. Is he going to win a championship at Red Bull? I think that's incredibly unlikely when you've got a teammate like Max Verstappen. And, but maybe I think it just depends on what level of acceptance there is there, I suppose, and how happy he is with how things sit. Some drivers would prefer to go to a smaller team where they can be the leader. We've kind of seen that with Bottas to an extent, where he's gone to Alfa Romeo. They've given him that kind of security in a long-term deal, and he's got that kind of leadership role. And I think he's kind of thriving off that. He says he's happier than ever, really. He's arguably happier in that situation than he was when he was at Mercedes in a title-winning car, where he'd always win the first race of the season and we'd all gas him up, and then it would just fall away.
30.0. This is it. This is the championship charge this season.
He's an Australia merchant. That's what he is.
Australia merchant.
That's what. And it just depends on what you want. And I think that there's no right or wrong answer. I think Checo's, again, doing the job that Red Bull need him to do for now. Would he like to be closer to Max? Sure. But also, we're having this discussion, but is it really an issue that Checo's quite a bit off Max? In this context, no, it's not. I think, when like Albon was in the seat last year, I think if that delta had been as big as it... Well, I think if this delta existed now in 2020, there probably would be more pressure on it because, Max was winning odd races. That Red Bull was winning odd races, but it wasn't like the package that it is now. So I think it's when, it's a good time for Sergio to be quite a bit off Max at the moment. But, I think Mercedes are going to take a step forward next year for sure. I think Ferrari, hopefully they sort out their stuff. And then if there's 3 teams fighting, then I think Checo does need to find a way of getting closer. Not just for, for himself, but to help out a title challenge that probably will be a thing for Max.
By the way, side note, I actually checked, and Valtteri Bottas did score points in Australia, so I think you're bang on with that Australia merchant line, to be fair. But back on topic, I think it should be said that, Sergio does have a contract until 2024, so there is some kind of security there, and, if he does get kicked out, at least there is kind of a buyout, I suppose, so he'll get a bit of money from that. I don't know if that actually kind of adds anything to, to Sergio being at Red Bull, because...
But again, what would be the advantage of kicking him out? I don't understand. Yes, we can acknowledge this gap's here, but I don't think he should lose the seat at all. No, not in the slightest. What would be the benefit of doing that?
I think it all depends on next year and how and what the relative gaps are, because Formula One changes so quick. And if if Mercedes and Ferrari are much closer, at the moment, the disparity between, the delta between, especially in qualifying, it's not really hurting Red Bull because Max is winning every single race. And even then, Sergio is still able to pick up some decent points and have some good scraps, with the Ferraris and Mercedes. But it's all about next year, and mentally, is he still gonna be strong if that gap kind of continues, or I don't think it's gonna get bigger. I think once it gets to 8 tenths or 7 tenths, or close to a second, then I do think we need to start worrying, kind of look at the performances a little bit closer. But if it stays at half a second, yes, that's quite big. But mentally, if he can survive that, and if it's not hurting Red Bull, then I think that's totally fine. And also, I think you said, what is their other option? Like Alex, I think, is always there. We know that he still has those Red Bull links. Obviously, he still has the Red Bull branding on his helmet as well. So there's some kind of tangible links, even if it is just a sponsorship. So,
but I think that might be gone now, no? Since he signed his extension with Williams.
Oh, really? Well, there you go.
I think that's now over, but there's not fully confirmed. But I think there was some like cryptic kind of wordplay from Alex around it, and I think he was like basically that. But I guess there's still a human relationship there, so you can never write it off, right?
Exactly, and I think that's why, we talk about, what is it, Fernando Alonso, he's been back at that Enstone team, 3 times now? Or like, he's raced for them 3 times, and just keeping those Red Bull relationships, with Marco, having a little dinner, asking Helmut Marco, how's Sergio doing? How's Sergio? Oh, he's quite far off Max these days, and I'm bombing out Williams, man, I'm buzzing. But just keeping those relationships, I think, is good, so it's, yeah, but they don't have options at the moment. I mean, I think Gasly is trying to find a way out as much as he can. He's just like, get anyone in my seat. I want to be at Alpine. And Tsunoda's nowhere near ready. I think they would like to have Tsunoda at Red Bull maybe one day with the Honda links, and maybe Yuki also. I think he's quite good for the brand. He seems like he's enjoying life behind the scenes at Red Bull / AlphaTauri, but as a driver, mentally, he is nowhere near ready for a top team, let alone even talking about the performance. Like, is he going to be able to handle the car? Just mentally, Yuki needs to mature a lot more, I think. So there's no rush in trying to find anyone. So
I've heard an interesting theory on Nick De Vries, and I
on
think
Twitter?
Probably, but I think it does hold water. Obviously, all this talk of Nick De Vries potentially AlphaTauri having this meeting with Helmut Marko, which is confirmed, so it definitely did happen. And Nick is 27, so he's 5 years younger than Sergio, and you got to think that maybe, right now in terms of the Red Bull talent pool, there's no one really shining, and I guess that's part of the reason why Horner's annoyed with himself that he missed out on Piastri. But I think that using that seat to get a Nick De Vries in, who's got a great relationship with Max. Not just because they're Dutch, but they are actually like mates.
Yeah, back in the day, the karting days, mate.
Exactly. And, maybe as a replacement to Checo down the line, they're potentially thinking about De Vries. He's a bit younger. He's got that great relationship with Max, so probably would play ball as well. That kind of makes a lot of sense to me, I suppose, because again, Red Bull aren't looking for someone to jump in and upset the apple cart, because Max is in a fantastic position, and it would take one hell of a driver, by the way, to come in and reach Max Verstappen's levels, or come anywhere near. So I think Red Bull were quite those rumours and that conversation about that De Vries to AlphaTauri move. To me that smells like they're thinking long term about
even the Colton Herta. Even the Colton Herta, I think for the Red Bull brand, they were like, he's American, so that also IndyCar driver, there is something exciting. There was this kind of momentum around Colton. So they're actively looking for people to, clearly not from their talent pool, because they think everyone in F2 is just doing not good enough, which I think is kind of interesting. But yeah, they're clearly actively looking for drivers. So the Colton Herta, I think it kind of came and went. Now they're on Nick De Vries, and there's just, it's weird. I think in terms of what this means for Sergio, I think he's in a good place, because I think nothing is going to change in the next year or two, even with the gap that he's got to Max at the moment.
But I think as well, Red Bull's philosophy around this whole Toro Rosso AlphaTauri team. This is literally my video this weekend, by the way. Not weekend, this week.
Plug.
And plug. And, their philosophy around that team has changed, right? It started as a junior team. They started it 351 days after they purchased Jaguar for Red Bull Racing. They purchased Minardi, not even a year after, and rebranded it to Toro Rosso. And that was the stepping stone, right? But the whole, rebranding to AlphaTauri, becoming a sister team, because at the end of the day, you look at that 2019 Toro Rosso livery and it's just Red Bull, right? They're just promoting Red Bull. That's what it is. It's just more marketing for Red Bull. But what was the value they were getting out of it? Because it's, fighting in the midfield, not much really. So now stick the AlphaTauri name on it, clothing brand, boom. And then, the fact that they're talking about bringing drivers from outside. Obviously, Colton Herta, is young, yes, but also being stateside, Red Bull is huge in the States. You know that they're looking at those factors as well. And the fact that, again, they're entertaining De Vries, which is a very un-Toro Rosso move. Because I think, I think Toro Rosso's the junior team, AlphaTauri's the sister team. And again, that pivot just says a lot about, I think that team's getting sold soon. I can't lie. I think that team's getting sold very soon.
I mean, that team is... Red Bull aren't shy, and obviously, we've both spoken to, people that have said that Red Bull, in terms of AlphaTauri, they're openly for sale. Like, if anyone wants to come in, that team is for sale right now. We can make it Tommo Grand Prix. We can make, we can buy it tomorrow. We
have got... Well, no, we haven't actually. Have we got we have got monetization on this podcast, so,
There you go, exactly. So there might be an AlphaTauri buyout for this podcast. Exactly, there you go. But yeah, I think that team, the function of that team has definitely changed. And I feel like one of the reasons why they wanted to make it AlphaTauri is to show that, look, this team from a commercial viability, it can sell a product. Like, that's what this team can do. And I mean, Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda, they're runway models. Like, every single time I see them in that AlphaTauri stuff, I'm just like, yeah, fair play. Maybe you're doing it right.
They even use Max and Checo. Even Christian Horner, they get him on the modelling as well. So
do you remember? I remember seeing that. I think on Instagram at one point. I was like, whoa. And then Twitter obviously blew up with it. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario. The entire what the state of the Red Bull driver academy is as well. They've got, again, what are they going to do with their F2 juniors as well? I mean, I think that's still kind of strange. I mean, if you're seriously not considering any of them, and you're looking for Colton Herta, now you're looking at for Nick De Vries, what's the point of, stringing along your juniors in F2 as well? So yeah, it's a weird kind of state that Red Bull are in at the moment with both of their teams, but I think the main point is that their number one driver, the guy that they backed when he was 16 years old to put him in Formula One, he is delivering right now, and I think that's kind of all they care about, to be honest. And Sergio, I think you actually kind of said it right in terms of, like, this is a good time to be underperforming because Red Bull are dominant with Max, and there's not exactly a line of junior drivers to replace Sergio Perez. So he has time. He has kind of stability, as much stability as you can have with Helmut Marko around. So yeah, I think the future for Sergio is kind of stable-ish at the moment. And even if the gap stays at half a second in qualifying, and he's able to pick up the points and pick up the pieces when, say, Max is out of the race or the other teams are struggling, I think Red Bull are in kind of a good position at the moment. But I'll ask you one really quick question before we move over from this topic. Moving forward, though, who do you think, one driver, one name, who is the future, in your opinion, after Sergio Perez, whenever that is? Maybe next year, maybe the year after. Who do you think is the potential future?
I'm going to say, I think De Vries. I do. I think that move's being lined up. I think that's what they're looking to do. I agree. I think Tsunoda's there's raw pace there. There's a rough diamond there, but I think he still needs time. And I'd love it to be Yuki, but again, I just think, for what Red Bull want and need, and when they want that clear 1-2 dynamic, great relationship there between the two of them. Yeah, I could really see, once Checo does eventually leave Red Bull Racing, I could very much see Nick De Vries in that seat. What about you? So you're not escaping without answering it.
No. I know exactly who I'm going for. It's your boy. I still think Alex...
Really?
Yeah, the Red Bull experience, and the more he's going to be at Williams, the more he grows mentally and as a driver. I think he's already, done a fantastic job to bounce back in 2022. I could see him as he's carrying that team. Depends who his teammate is, of course, because that could be very interesting for next year. But as he carries Williams for the next few years, if they see, because we don't know what De Vries is going to be in Formula 1, by the way. He had that fantastic debut, and I don't want to play it down, but, there is a bit of Latifi tax on that. And when you get to AlphaTauri, pressure ramps up. AlphaTauri and the Red Bull program, whatever, is not Williams. So how Nick De Vries is going to handle that mentally, I think we're going to wait and see. I do think an all-Dutch lineup, by the way, chaos at Red Bull. I mean, that would just be... That would be content for F1 Twitter, no doubt about it. So kind of a W there. But I think... I don't think Alex is completely off their radar, and in 2 or 3 years, when Alex is kind of the finished article of what he could be as a driver, all of the experience, all of the learning, And maybe he is a little bit quicker than De Vries in 2 or 3 years' time when Sergio's time is up. I'm not saying no.
Yeah, I think obviously there is that tyre connection as well, obviously to Red Bull's ownership. I think that, I think that can't be understated either. Yeah, I do wonder.
We also don't know. The problem with Williams as well is that we don't know where they're going to be. I guess they're making progress, and it is very difficult. I understand that in Formula One, but I could honestly easily see them in 2 years' time still being last. That could still be.
Yeah, I guess it massively does depend on that, right? Because obviously, if Alex does he's got what, 2, so he's guaranteed that team to the end of 24, right? Because he's got that. Well, I mean, nothing's guaranteed in F1 contracts. Basically worth toilet paper off your ass, but you've got that. I guess, depending on how that Williams car develops, because obviously going back to Red Bull, and this whole conversation had around Pierre Gasly, had around Daniel Kvyat, of them, the idea of them going back to where it went wrong for them is certainly a risk. But again, obviously, like you say, like when Albon was in that Red Bull seat, it was his second year in Formula One. If he was to go back in, say, 2025, it would be his, 6th, whatever it is. It would be a very different driver. I think, that depends a lot. I mean, I really hope Williams pick it up and become a semi-competitive car. And hopefully, again, in 3-4 years' time, this sliding development scale and the cost cap will start to kind of pay dividends. I guess, that would be a big decision for Alex to make, but maybe.
I think, if Red Bull do come calling and they're still a top team and you're still kind of, okay, you're not 10th, but you're 9th in the Constructors' Championship with Williams, there's still no progress. How do you turn that down? Again, you definitely roll the dice. So, I'm not, but I think there's options for Red Bull, but it's clearly not something that's going to happen in the next year, in my opinion. But I'm not giving up on your boy. Actually, do you know what, Binner? Get Alonso in. He's got the same driving style as Max. He's no doubt to anything.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that just for a race.
Just give him a 3-race stint. Honestly, that's all. Just sign him to a 3-race deal for the end of the season. Alpine, you can put Pierre Gasly in and get Nick De Vries in AlphaTauri. Everyone just get that stuff going and give Alonso that car for the last 3 races.
Actually,
I'd love to see that.
I've got one question as well, right? Say Max gets the title sewn up this weekend, right, at Singapore. Do you chuck Tsunoda in the Red Bull, chuck Gasly in the Red Bull, maybe swap the drivers around, and just see what happens? That would be. I know people would be up in arms, but
are you saying get rid of
that.
Max for the let him chill in Monaco to play?
If
FIFA?
He's won the championship, just stick him in the AlphaTauri, see what he can do. That would be sick. Just swap the drivers. I'd love to see that.
Well, according to Laurent Rossi, a driver is only 5% of the performance. He can't do. Max Verstappen can't do anything.
I saw that earlier.
Oh my god, another L. But anyway. To be fair, I'd love something like that. And the problem is Red Bull we're in imaginary land, but Red Bull are the only team that I could actually see doing that. Should we just give Yuki a stint in the Red Bull?
That would be great marketing. Come on, Max Verstappen in an AlphaTauri. That would be sick marketing.
Exactly, the double world with the number 1 on the AlphaTauri.
Mate, that's the thumbnail. Fuck it. That's what I'm doing for this thumbnail.
Oh, quality sorted. There you go. But that'd be awesome. But no, give it to Alonso. I want to see him in that Red Bull just for the bants. But either way, I think Red Bull and the Sergio Perez kind of story. Although it's a bit sad how it's turned out, because I think going back to Saudi Arabia, actually, the one thing that really stuck with me is an interview with Christian Horner where he said, in 2021 there were so many ups and downs for that side of the garage, and we forget the people working on Sergio Perez's car that aren't to do with Max's car. And it was so good to see their guy get pole position and have this kind of uptick in form. And I kind of do feel for that side of the garage a little bit. But that's just that's Formula One. We'll see what happens with Sergio Perez. But that's kind of our thoughts on the future of that second Red Bull seat. And the saga continues, mate. Ever since we're back where we were in 2019, just Max is doing a bit better. So can't wait for the next installment in 2023. Now we are going to quickly actually cover some little bit of news actually in Formula One. I was going to say big news, but I think that kind of be over-egging it just a little bit. Latifi, I'm just going to let you cook, mate. You go for it. Latifi's out for 2023. Williams have... what I found interesting, and I know this is kind of normal, but they haven't even found a driver, but they've straight up just said Latifi's gone. Usually you announce that Latifi is gone, but sometimes you have that kind of driver announcement right away. Like with the way Mercedes and Alfa Romeo kind of sorted Bottas out, like it was announced that Valtteri was leaving and Alfa Romeo already had the contract signed up. Williams there's no speculation anymore. They've just said he is gone, but we don't actually have a driver yet. So Latifi out, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Williams said that they basically they kind of lent on Nicholas to when it was going to be announced, and he wanted to announce it sooner rather than later, which is fair enough because, you know, obviously after Monza, the noise around him was you know, from ourselves, from the community, from everyone was pretty deafening, because, you know, that was it, that was the final nail, and I think it's the right thing to do to just get that announced early doors so that the news is out there. We know he's leaving. There's no more questions around, oh my God, they might actually keep him, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think it's better for all parties that it's
when
just
that De Vries,
announced.
by the way, when that De Vries stuff was kicking off, I was honestly like, it might happen, you know. If they don't trust Logan Sargent, they might just like re-sign him again, and that would have been, oh my God, chaos.
That's what I mean. And I think they just needed to put a pin in that, to be like, right, no, Latifi's definitely going. It takes that kind of that pressure off of Williams and that pressure off of Nicholas, I think, to an extent, because he could just probably drive with a bit more freedom now that it's kind of out there. So I think it was the right decision to announce that, and I think it's the right decision to not rush, I guess, on a driver, unless, of course, and you know, I've asked this question myself, and you know, I think the overwhelming response at the minute is Williams need to, you know, throw the kitchen sink at Nick De Vries to try and get him in, because obviously, you know, he's done enough clearly to put himself in the shop window where you've got 3 teams, you know, seriously considering him by the look of it. So
I was going to say, what if Alpine and AlphaTauri throw an even bigger kitchen sink at him?
And their sink is bigger, you know, that they've got more performance. So you've got to think that, you know, if Nick De Vries is you know, there's no guarantees of anything, right? You look at Ricciardo going from Renault to McLaren, and you know, you had a very different driver in both cars, right? And I think De Vries, obviously, he's tested in Mercedes cars. He's, you know, tested
only the McLaren
Mercedes.
left.
Yeah, well, it's true. It's true. Maybe.
And then he's got all the Mercedes Infinity Stones, mate. He's got all of them.
But that's the thing, like, I don't know what the best decision would be for Nick. I mean, you've got to think Alpine, because that is a manufacturer, and it's probably the 4th best car at the minute. So, you know, that option's going to be tempting. Obviously, Logan Sargent isn't guaranteed enough super license points, and we know from the Herta situation that the FIA aren't prepared to make concessions around that. Although, if it's someone who's come through their own FIA Formula 2 championship, maybe
they do love their little pyramid.
They do, didn't they? So yeah, I'm not really. I mean, yeah, the decision was a no-brainer. As for who replaces, I think, you know, if they can get Nick De Vries, get him signed now, I think probably do it, and then give Logan like another year in F2, and then maybe reconsider, because obviously Logan's not won F2, so he can do another season. But yeah, I think if they can get De Vries in, I think, like I said earlier, right, having 2 strong drivers who are at a similar level, and look, we don't know exactly what Nick De Vries' level is going to be, because I think Monza's one of the easier tracks to just jump in at late notice, right, because it's straight.
And it's a track that every single junior driver's driven at 1,000,000 times as well.
Exactly, they've got loads of experience there. So I just think that, yeah, I'm not too sure what the best course of action is, but if I was Williams, I would, as much as I love Logan Sargent, my option 1 would be try and get De Vries, get him signed down now. If you need to wait and he still wants to weigh up his options, fine, wait until after Abu Dhabi, then you know if Logan's an option.
Unless Christian Horner steals Logan Sargent as well.
Imagine. I mean, that could be a risk. Yeah, that's always
actually,
a risk.
Listen, Nicky, I know we kind of binned you off, but we don't have anyone else, mate. Can you come back? Do you know what's quite interesting also? I know Matt joked last episode that, you know, what's the point of watching Abu Dhabi Formula 2? That final race, there is a hell of a lot. I know the championship's over and Teo Porcher, I also think, is going to finish second, whatever, but there is a hell of a lot. I'm looking at the championship standings. There's a lot riding on that last race. Like, any one of Logan Sargent, Jack Doohan, Jehan Daruvula, Enzo Fittipaldi, and even Liam Lawson down to second. down to 7th, could all finish 3rd. Like, there is a lot riding on that weekend.
Is there 4 drivers on the same points?
I think that there's within 9 points, there's like 4 drivers, which is nuts. And then Liam Lawson is like a few points behind. So about 15 points separates 3, 4, 5 drivers. It's crazy.
I think Logan needs P6 minimum if he does an FP1 with Williams. Because if he does an FP1 with Williams, he gets 1 super license point for that. And then I think he needs to finish P6 to get the 40.
Be honest, I'm actually not thinking... I'm thinking less about the super license because I think he's going to get it anyway. I'm thinking about the optics and the momentum. If you finish 6th and only just scrape enough points, it doesn't look quite as good. If you finish 3rd, I mean, that's a lot better.
How much do you think the teams actually care about that, though? Because obviously they know the driver. They've got all the data. They know the context of how certain situations have panned out. So how much do you think because I know we as fans, right, we look at the numbers and it's very easy to oversimplify, but these teams, they have the data. Like, if Logan has a really strong quali, really strong race, and then the car blows up in both the sprint and the feature race,
like it did at Paul Ricard, basically,
surely the team wouldn't really care too much because they're looking at the performance. No, I know the optics aren't great, but does the team care about that?
That is the exact word I was going to use. I think it's more the optics of Logan coming in. Like you're talking about. Yeah, this guy's had a lot of bad luck, but you're bringing in a guy who finished 6th in Formula 2 in his rookie season. Like, I think it's more the optics. I think the team trust him, and they're gonna. Hopefully, they do put him in for a free practice 1 session at some point. I don't know if
they have to, surely.
Yeah, I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but yeah, I think it's more the optics and the way he comes into Formula 1 at that point. Like, you're coming in, finishing 3rd. It kind of looks a little bit better. I don't think it's massively important, but just for the momentum, just for the narrative, I think it's better if he secures that P3. But Jack Doohan is also in line for that Alpine seat. So that final race, there's a lot hanging on. Like, there's a lot to play for. So I can't wait for it, to be honest. But yeah, kind of also rounding off the whole Nicholas Latifi thing. I definitely think that it was good that they kind of announced it as early as they could, because ultimately he wasn't good enough. I think he was making progress in 2021. But I think Abu Dhabi was massive for him mentally. I think the mental effect it had on that, and I understand all of the backlash and how unwarranted it was, but in Formula 1, at the top level of sport, having the ability to drive a car is almost maybe not even as important as the mental factor as well, in terms of being able to survive in that environment, being able to prove people wrong, being able to come back from a position of really struggling. And I don't think he ever got over Abu Dhabi 2021, to be honest. I think it's something that Jos Capito talked about at the beginning of the season. He said, yeah, Nicky had a bad start, but he has progressed a little bit. I haven't seen it. The car's got better. He got those upgrades, I think, in Silverstone, and the performances ultimately have not gotten better. So he's just a driver who I think ultimately and very simply wasn't good enough to be in Formula 1. He had the money at the time. He was in the right place at the right time. He's a great guy, no doubt about it. I'm not even comparing him, personality-wise to someone like Mazepin, but ultimately, he doesn't have enough driving talent and he wasn't good enough to be in Formula 1. It was the money that kept him there. And now Williams very clearly realised, and this is something I was talking about last year, his level of performance is capping that team. They have a cap of what results they can get with him at the team, so it was time to go, no doubt about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the consistency of Alex, not even getting into the points, but getting close to the points, like the amount of P11s, 12s, 13s he's had, where, you put yourself P11 and it takes one person having a shunt at the front, and then all of a sudden you sneak in the points. And, Nicky was just nowhere near. And yeah, again, I'm not surprised. We've had our fair share of Twitter pylons when, people don't like what we say, and it's not nice. And I can't even begin to imagine.
I don't know what you're talking about, Tommo. I don't know what you're talking about.
I can't even begin to imagine how, going through that, knowing that you're forgetting all the online, stuff, putting all that to one side, just knowing that, it was the impact that what happened, what his kind of action, his crash happened, and how that, has changed the course of Formula One history to an extent. And knowing that there was so much, same could be said for Michael Massey, right? And knowing how much anti-you sentiment there was brewing amongst a lot of people, that must be incredibly, I can't even begin to imagine how tough that that must have been on a mental level. So there's no doubt, because I think he was more comfortable in the 2021 car than he's been in this 2022 one. I think that gap to Alex has been.
I don't think he understands it as well. Even Monza, we're more than 2/3 of the way through the season. He's still talking about the car as if he's uncomfortable, and he doesn't understand what's going wrong. He doesn't understand why is it working for Alex, why is it working for Nick, who's only just jumped in about 20 minutes ago, and it's not working for him. But I think all of that could have been, Abu Dhabi 2021, all of that could have been silenced by performance. If he was out,
100%.
If he was outperforming Albon, people can say whatever they want about, what happened last year. That would have been the thing that would have silenced.
Well, it would have given him confidence, wouldn't it? His confidence was already muddied. It would have given him belief in himself. But also, maybe this is nothing to do with it, but I wouldn't be surprised. Latifi is a driver who didn't start in karts till he was 12. Most of these kids start when they're 8, and that 4 years, and that, I watched a really good video actually yesterday. It was talking about, the things that Latifi said in terms of, when he was at that early stage, he didn't have that natural feel. He had to kind of learn it on a more like whiteboard level of how to drive, and it wasn't going off instincts. And you just think that at that early stage, I think Latifi was never going to be able to become this, absolute natural feel that a driver like Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, whoever has. And unfortunately, like you say, again, I think the mental battering he would have taken after the end of last year, then jumping into this car with your new teammate who's immediately like miles ahead of you on pace. I mean, no wonder he hasn't been able to turn it around, unfortunately, because I just think it's a combination of a lack of confidence, but also just not having that natural ability.
Yeah, it's a combination of the ability, the mental side, and again, Williams, I think they kept him a year too late, to be honest. There's always this talk of, look how much a stable driver, even having one driver at the team, how much it could help us next season. I think that's so overplayed. Like, if they had a brand new driver lineup for this season for a brand new set of regs, I think they would have had better results. Even if you put someone like Hulkenberg in there, who has never been at that. Actually, no, he has been at the team, of course, made his debut for them, but that was like almost a decade ago. I think it's overplayed how much stability and continuity actually aids you by the end of the season. But anyway, ultimately, we'll see where he goes. Obviously, he's going to be nowhere near Formula One, because if you're not good enough to be at the back of the grid, you're not good enough to be in Formula One. But whether he goes to sports cars or I don't know, Formula E or something, I think there is still, he still can have a career, but I think his legacy looking back is one of the last kind of pay drivers where we looked at him and said he was a pay driver and he was not good enough to be in Formula One, to be honest.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of drivers who've, had not particularly successful F1 careers and have gone on to do well elsewhere. Like, I think Marcus Ericsson is a really good example, where he's kind of, wins the Indy 500, has made himself a kind of staple in that series.
He's also absolutely jokes on Twitter as well, just to add that as well.
He's very good at shit posting. And with Latifi, obviously that Safina support is going to help him. That support from his dad is going to help open opportunities. This is also a driver who finished, second in Formula 2. He's had his moments. I think, again, sports car, IndyCar, Formula E, I don't know. Maybe, obviously there's all this NMDH new category stuff. You got Porsche coming in, Ferrari and all that. So I don't know. He'll be fine. Like, there's more to motorsport than just Formula One, and he's still fair. He's like 27, 28, something like that. So he's got years in him to do what he wants, and I think that F1. I mean, look, maybe there was. I was wondering whether he'd potentially step back into like a reserve role, just to keep that money coming in the same kind of way as obviously you got Robert Kubica, who's at Alfa Romeo. He's obviously not the driver he once was, which is a crying shame because he was. I
think to someone like a Haas, I think that could work for someone like a Haas,
maybe,
because they need the money. Like, just have him as a kind of reserve driver, a few FP1s next year.
I could see that. I think if there was a reserve driver opportunity on the grid, I think Haas would make the most sense. But we'll see.
And also, really quickly, Yuki Tsunoda obviously getting a contract for next year as well. Kind of by the skin of his teeth, I think it's such an interesting year for Yuki Tsunoda in terms of, like, it's been such an up and down, like. Seeing his 2022, but yeah, he's staying for next year. What do you think of that?
Well, in the last pod, we were talking about drivers potentially, and you weren't convinced, were you? You weren't convinced he was going to be kept on.
Yeah, I didn't think he was like surefire. Let's sign him up right now, because there was some pressure from other drivers, but clearly, don't get me wrong. I am glad that he secured it, because I'm still hoping. I'm still praying that next year everything comes together and he's gonna be the next Max Verstappen. He's gonna go to Red Bull. He's gonna win races. Yuki Tsunoda, because I love Japanese drivers. I love Japanese kind of motorsport and car culture, and I want to see a Japanese driver do well. But yeah, he's definitely been unlucky a lot this season. But it's, again, he's got a contract for next season, so we go again.
I would love to have seen this current caliber Yuki Tsunoda, where he's clearly made a step forward in terms of performance. Still has a big mistake in him, don't get me wrong. But still has clearly made a step forward. I'd love to have seen him in this current form in last year's car, because last year's car could put it top. I mean, Pierre Gasly put that top 6 qualifying like most of the time, literally. So I think that car not being at the level has definitely hindered his ability to show how much he has improved. But there's still big caveats. But I think, whenever you look at, numerous people, team principals have talked about this. Bernardo talked about this with Leclerc. You'd rather a driver that oversteps the mark and rein them back than one that isn't prepared to go to that level. Now, I'm not saying Tsunoda's on Leclerc's level in terms of driving performance at all, but what I'm saying is that, you'd rather someone who overextends a bit and pull them back than someone who isn't prepared to go to that edge. So, yeah, I'm still confident in Yuki. I think as well the fact that, imagine if Red Bull had a talent pool of coming through F2 of the likes of Russell and Norris, that would maybe make Yuki's seat a bit more at risk. But none of the Red Bull juniors have really stamped their case on this F2 season. And as much as, Lawson's got enough super license points now for sure. Like, I just don't... Because there hasn't been that pressure, that real pressure of someone really strong coming through the ranks, I think Yuki's good. Yuki's all right.
And even his teammate, who has a contract for next year, he might not even be there. So, yeah, it was kind of a safe choice. And I mean, again, I'm buzzing that he got the contract, but there was actually a little clip from a podcast that AlphaTauri do where I think someone asked Yuki, what's your best moment in Formula One? And he said Bahrain 2021. And I just thought, if your best moment after a year and 2/3 is still your first ever race, something just still isn't quite clicking. But I think there is the driver in there, but it's just, I think mentally more than anything, just maturing a little bit more and being able to harness. I'm not sure he understands why he's quick and why he's not in that car, and also how to manage races as well. It's like over the course of a lap, I think he can now hold it with Pierre Gasly for the most part on the right track, but over the course of a race distance, whether it's little mistakes or whether it's even simple stuff like tyre management, I think there's something missing there, and hopefully he can kind of gain it over time, because, yeah, that's, I think, the only thing that's kind of missing from his armory, and it's quite a big thing. Race management is literally where the points are scored. So, yeah, we're going to see how he develops next year, and if that rough diamond can continue to be shined and polished. But, yeah, it's still pretty rough after 2 years. But that's enough of the driver talks. Actually, just to really quickly end it, obviously, next race is Singapore, back for the first time since 2019. Which seems nuts. I am absolutely buzzing. I mean, there's been a lot of talks about the 24 race calendar. Is there too many? What tracks should stay? What tracks are good? What tracks are bad? To me, Singapore, absolutely, it brings that variety. It's a massive physical challenge for the drivers. We're talking about a humid, hot climate. There's very good reason why they drive at night. And I do like to see these challenges. It is kind of a quicker Monaco, but with a much more tricky environment. And I think, for people that have never, raced on any level, that physical, trust me, you feel that physical aspect when you actually race yourself.
Trust Aldas. He knows.
Mate, after like an
physical
hour...
an F1 car is around
maybe
Singapore.
Not F1 car, but like even at the low level that I race in cars, like after an hour and a half stint in a car, you bloody feel it. After an hour 10, you're gone. So I actually really like, I've almost come to appreciate and enjoy that physical challenge that the drivers get at Singapore and, tracks like Malaysia, even though obviously we're not back there anytime soon. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to getting back to Singapore. Should be good.
Yeah, same. No, it's important for the calendar to be diverse where we go around the world, and hopefully there's a South African Grand Prix on the horizon. We know that those meetings have happened. That's super important, but also it's important that the actual tracks themselves are diverse. I think there's room for Monacos, there's room for Spas, there's room for Singapores. I think that, like you say, it offers a different challenge. Sure, it's not the most overtakey track on the grid. I get that, but again, in the same way that Monaco excels in other ways. I think qualifying's always, I mean, there's been some worldy qualifying laps around Singapore over the years. And because there's just no margin for error. And I think there's been some great races, the humid temperatures, drivers probably more likely to make errors because it's such a physical experience. I guess we'll see if, I know Alex is trying to get ready for the race, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Nick de Vries co-signs for that as well, and that would be one hell of a challenge for Nick if that is the case. I'm sure he's been flat out on the gym this week and trying to prepare himself best he can if he is needed.
Just get those neck muscles like pumping for Singapore. I was also going to say, out of all of the tracks to come back to after surgery and after surgery complications, like Singapore is not the one on that I'd go, yeah, that's the one I'd want to come back to. Like,
I don't think he should race personally. I don't think he should. I'm not a doctor, but I just don't think it's worth it given the context of, I just think give De Vries another seat, and then Williams have got even more data on him.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree as well. But also looking forward to the fact that hopefully this track, should bring Ferrari and maybe even Mercedes as well, although I'm not quite sure how it's going to be with the Singapore bumps. It should bring those teams a little bit closer towards Red Bull, so potentially a little bit more mix-up. So, yeah, Red Bull 1-2 confirmed that probably after I've said that. But...
I just want Lewis to win a race. I just really want Lewis to win a race before the end of the year. And I feel like this might be their best bet. I don't know. Hard to say, but like you said, the bumps, but it is slow speed.
Is that British bias I hear, Tommo? Surely not.
British bias, exactly. I want Lewis to beat his British teammate.
Exactly, there we go. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Singapore. It should be hopefully a great Grand Prix, everything, and also kind of the run-up to the remainder of the season. And once again, Max Verstappen could wrap his 2022 championship up in Singapore, although Ferrari would need to have a shocker. Wouldn't put it past them. But yeah, so that should be quite interesting as well. But yeah, Tom, have you got anything else, or are we ready to wrap?
I think that's about it, mate. There'll be a lot more to talk about after next weekend's race. Also, quick one as well, but to everyone who's watching, these podcasts are going up earlier on audio only because it's much quicker to export the audio only. So if you want to listen to these first, then make sure you're subscribed or whatever you do on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And do all that stuff, all right? Because these pods will be going up there first before the video version goes on YouTube. So,
and also don't forget to give us your 5-star rating. Massively appreciated. It does help a huge amount. But there you go, wrapping this one up. Just me and Tommo for this one once again. I'm sure the two frauds will be back for the next one. Hopefully, we'll see if they want to turn up. I hope you did enjoy this one, and if you did, again, don't forget to let us know all of your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.